So now what to watch for as more polls close and more votes are counted. Caitlin Schiffer joins us with analysis with the Dean from Boston University's College of Communication. Caitlin?
Thanks, Shannon. I'm joined now by the Dean of Boston University's College of Communication, Tom Fiedler. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So it's obviously early on in the night. States that have been called so far are not surprises, but what can we look for as the night progresses?
Well, as been mentioned here, right now we're seeing the polls close in most of the states that are in the Eastern time zone and some in the Central time zone here. So in the Eastern time zone, the states that are considered the swing states, the battleground states, are New Hampshire. Torrance mentioned also Pennsylvania, North Carolina, where that's going to be pushed back a little bit, and Florida. Very early on in there, I just was checking so far the count in Florida is only about 25% of the total count in. What you have to kind of keep in mind as you watch the totals roll forward is that the rural areas are going to be the areas that report first. It's obvious, it's simpler to count them, they're smaller, fewer numbers. And then as you get into the larger cities, it'll take a little bit longer. So the early counts can be misleading as you'll see the lead shift back and forth from one to the other. It's when you start getting into the 80–90% of the ballots counted that you see the race really beginning to firm up and taking the shape that I think we'll watch. So the idea is relax, take a few deep breaths, and then come back in a few minutes and wait till you see more of those returns come in.
For sure, and before we came on, I was checking polls. Florida, like you said, flopping back and forth. Florida, big state. North Carolina, big state. How are these battle states playing into the results? Which states are going to be the main deciders tonight?
Well, the ones that Donald Trump has to win in order to find any path whatsoever to the 270 electoral votes, he's got to win Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire. If he loses North Carolina, Florida, or Pennsylvania, it's going to be virtually impossible for him to find the numbers that he needs. So those are the ones that I would watch in this, again, the Eastern time zone.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dean Fiedler.
Happy to be here. I'll be here all night.
Yeah, we'll come back to you for future analysis as the night progresses. Shannon and Alicia, back to you.
Now we have Caitlin Schiffer, who will be joining us with a little bit more of analysis. She joins us now with one of our professors here from Boston University. Caitlin, what do you have for us?
Thanks, Shannon. I'm joined now by BU Professor John Carroll. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
So all eyes are on the White House right now, but we should also be taking into consideration the Senate. So how are those results looking so far?
Well, it's early, but one of the races has been called the race in Florida. Marco Rubio has won re-election. That was a long shot to some degree for the Democrats, but they were hoping that they might have a chance with that. Out in Ohio, Rob Portman has retained his seat, a Republican incumbent. That was expected. So there are a lot of tight races. We're going to see some of them in Pennsylvania, Missouri, Illinois. Those are going to be the ones that determine the balance of the Senate, and that's still to be determined.
For sure, and one of the major races that we're seeing is the one out of New Hampshire. It's been one of the most expensive advertising races that we've seen so far. How do you think that's going to impact the results that we see?
Well, I think it may be a wash because there was a lot of money that came in from the outside that really flooded. And Boston was actually the market that received the most ad spending in the entire election. And a lot of that had to do with the New Hampshire race because the Boston television stations go up into New Hampshire. New Hampshire only has one station of its own. So there was a real flood of advertising there. And a lot of times when you have that, it sort of cancels each other out. And so what you have is a sort of a built-in electorate that has a sense of who they want to elect. In this case, it's going to be a tight race between Kelly Ayotte and Maggie Hassan, both of whom have their appeal in terms of the service they've provided within the government.
For sure, and obviously one of the main reasons that the Senate is so important is that it can lean Democrat, can lean Republican. What happens in the event of a 50-50 split?
In the event of a 50-50 split, it depends on who the president is, because the vice president will be the tiebreaker. So if Donald Trump is the president, then Vice President Pence will be the one who'll come in and be the 51st vote. It'll be the opposite way if it's Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine. So a 50-50 split really leads you to a difficult situation because it's going to be hard for either one of the parties to get anything done, regardless of who's in the White House.
So in the event that Republicans maintain the Senate, how do you think that'll impact things in the future?
Well, it'll make it harder for President Clinton to get anything done because they can be obstructionists in the way that they have been with Barack Obama. On the other hand, it can be something where it would temper the expectations of a lot of the Democrats because they would realize we're not going to get Bernie Sanders' progressive agenda here, but maybe we can settle for something that would be close to some kind of progress. So in a way, it might be a benefit to a President Hillary Clinton that it's a Republican Senate because they wouldn't expect, that progressive wing wouldn't expect she'd be going out and getting $15 an hour for the minimum wage, free college tuition, that kind of thing. It would temper expectations and maybe set up a situation where she could actually be more successful.
So in that event, would it be sort of an extension of the Obama administration where we do see this conflict between the White House and Congress?
Right. You'd see a lot of the same dynamics because the House is likely to stay Republican. If the Senate stays Republican, then you're going to have the same dynamic. You're going to have the same sort of geometry that's been going on for the last 6 or so years. So what you would see then would be a lot of obstructionism, likely. You would see a real tussle over the reappointment or the appointment of the 9th Supreme Court Justice. You would see all those things that would basically replicate a lot of what happened during the Obama administration.
And you mentioned the Supreme Court Justice. How is these results going to impact what we see in the Supreme Court?
There's one theory that if Hillary Clinton wins, that the lame duck session might approve Merrick Garland, who was put forth by Barack Obama, because they would think we're not going to get anybody more acceptable than this. A Hillary Clinton nomination is probably going to be more liberal, more unacceptable to the Republicans. So they might go into lame duck session and say, you know what, let's just put this guy through because we're not going to do any better than this.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Professor Carroll. We'll come back to you later in the night for more analysis. Alicia and Channing, back to you.
Now for more, let's go to Caitlin Schiffer, who will be telling us a little bit more about what all of these key states winning by Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, what they mean for the election. Caitlin?
Thanks, Channing. I'm joined now by Boston University Dean of Students, Ken Elmore. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So a lot of the atmosphere that I see on social media is a lot of BU students are saying that this election season is kind of gloom and doom. They're saying this is the apocalypse, the end of democracy as we know it. So what's the worst case scenario if either of these candidates wins?
Well, I think the worst case scenario is not a worst case scenario. If anything, the worst case scenario is this is democracy. Anecdotally, that's always been the case, that people think that this is worst case scenario sort of stuff. And I like to say to folks, don't live ahistorically. When I was in college, every presidential election seemed like the end of the world as well. This is not the case. We live in a place and a democracy where there is a change of hands, where we make sure that we go from one leader to another. And I think that this should be the same sort of thing. The tenor and the tension of the times may be very high, but ultimately we come out of this sort of thing.
For sure. And I mean, a lot of things that are playing into this is social media just in general. How have you seen social media play into the results that we're seeing?
Well, I think social media plays into it in a couple of ways. Certainly, it's one of those things where if you go into social media, you are going in as a gunslinger and you better have a gun as a piece of it. And it's a tough, rough and tumble kind of situation that's out there. So you get people who can feel like their feelings are getting hurt. You can feel folks who feel this sort of existential threat to themselves. And also they dish it as well. So I think that people have got to be, you've got to make this distinction between good trash talking and sort of jogging each other, and at the same time being able to hopefully get to some content about what you want to see in this election and content about what's actually going on. So it's social media, and I think that people have got to put that into perspective. We try to make sure that we look for objective threats from people, and those don't happen as much as I think folks think, but a lot of hurt feelings do happen on social media.
Yeah, and there's obviously this sort of dichotomy between Democrats and Republicans right now, a lot of gridlock going on. How, after this election, do you think that we can begin to, mend those
Wow.
separations of opinion?
That is the million-dollar question. I think that if anyone's got a surefire prescription for how we mend, I will be their attorney, and I will make sure to take them far in terms of that. I think that we hope that whoever the president is tomorrow or maybe the next day, that one of the things that they will do is to stop and think about not just their electoral college win, but also how much of a margin their popular vote might be. You hope that we have someone who will say, this is worth healing, this is worth discussion, this is worth us thinking a little bit about. And I hope that we don't rely solely on the president to do that, but take a place like Boston University. I hope on the campus we're able to say, time out, let's stop and let's think about the ways that we should talk to each other. Think about some of these issues that are there. Make sure that, yeah, there's good, solid passion for what we believe in, but to understand how we have got to live with each other. None of us is going away, so we've got to find a way to make this work.
All right, thank you so much, Dean Elmore.
I appreciate having me.
Great analysis. So back to you, Alicia and Channing.
Now we have Caitlin Schiffer, who is joining us again with the Dean for the College of Communication, Dean Fiedler.
Thanks, Channing. I'm joined right now by the Dean of BU's College of Communication, Tom Fiedler. Thanks for joining us, Dean.
Happy to be back.
All right, so this race, really close call, real nail biter. What can we make of these results?
Well, I think right now, I don't know that we can make much of the results because the results are still up in the air. I know of the battleground states that we're really watching, the ones that can make a huge difference, North Carolina and Florida, particularly on the East Coast. We're down to the last probably several dozen precincts, and this just does seem to be going back and forth. I know my years in Florida that the last precincts to be counted tend to be those precincts in the condominium communities of South Florida, of Broward County, Miami-Dade County, and they tend to vote heavily Democratic, more than 2-1, sometimes 3-1. The question is whether the margin that Secretary Clinton trails now is enough, even if they come in at those historic levels, to make it up. But it is going to be a razor-thin margin, whichever way it goes. And if Florida stays with Donald Trump, as it looked like right now, it's close there, it could be a long night. Could be a long night.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
So obviously a huge concern in this entire election has been the scandals on either side of the party. Hillary Clinton with her emails, Donald Trump with his sexual assaults allegations. So how have these scandals affected the results that we're seeing?
Well, I think they have certainly affected the electorate. It's in most cases, and we've seen this in the exit polls, the public's view of this, it's a pox on both your houses. For the most part, a significant percentage of the voters on either side have said openly that they preferred that there would have been another candidate to vote for. So it's I think in our lifetimes, there has never been an election where whichever candidate wins will enter office with more negative approval than positive. If you can have negative approval, the attitude toward them will be more negative than positive. The only other time in at least relatively recent history where a sitting president has had negatives as high as what we see now with either Donald Trump or with Hillary Clinton was Richard Nixon when he was impeached. And Richard Nixon resigned because he said with such a high proportion of the people in the country against him, he couldn't govern. So we could be facing a situation where someone is taking office with negatives higher than Richard Nixon's when he resigned. So it's a very discouraging election in that regard.
And you are not a stranger to scandal in races at all with your coverage in 1988. So how would you say that coverage compares to this coverage of the coverage of Trump's scandals and Hillary Clinton's scandals?
It's really interesting. You're referring to that 1988 election where what was the leading Democratic candidate was involved in an affair. You know, we actually caught him and wrote about his having an affair while the campaign was going on, and it ended up driving him out of the race. Now it's interesting, I suppose, in one sense that we have a candidate in Donald Trump who has had multiple affairs. He's had multiple marriages, 3 marriages. He's had affairs while he was married, and it doesn't seem to deter his supporters. So I guess that means that the American electorate does not place that high a value anymore on what we would think of as the moral rectitude of candidates. It's something has moved on, something has changed, and I don't quite know exactly what to point to. Maybe we're a cruder society today. Of course, maybe we're a more tolerant society, but clearly the attitude is much different, or we wouldn't have seen Donald Trump do as well as he has. With Hillary Clinton, it's a different kind of thing. The idea that she made what many people on the Donald Trump side believe is a serious error. They claim it's criminal, even though there's been no charges brought. I think we've probably seen that before. We've seen candidates accuse others of criminal conduct, but the shift, perhaps, in where the bar for moral rectitude stands is a rather dramatic one, and I don't quite know where that happened.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dean Fiedler, for that analysis. Obviously, always a pleasure. We'll come back to you later in the night for more analysis.
We'll be here.
All right, and Alicia and Channing, back to you.
And now we go to Caitlin Schiffer with another interview.
Thanks, Adrian. I'm here with the Dean of BU's College of Communication, Tom Fiedler. Thank you for joining us
Hi,
again.
we're back, yes.
All right, so since last we talked, North Carolina and Florida both called for
Right.
Trump, major states. What can we take from those results?
Well, when you look at the formula that Donald Trump had to solve in order to get what was a very narrow path to the electoral victory, the 270 votes that he needs, so far he's running the table. He has hit every one of those toss-up states. So this is going to. I think this could very much flip that equation, so that right now the narrow path is Hillary Clinton's path. So she's going to have to hang on to Pennsylvania. The states that are traditionally Democratic that I think are going to be problematic for her are Michigan and Wisconsin. See how those states go. It was interesting that Donald Trump campaigned very hard in what we think of as those Rust Belt states, and the message that he had was, "I'll bring jobs back." Probably something he can't do, but in any event, it struck a chord, and so it seems to me that we might see those states also go to Donald Trump, which this is going to be quite a nail biter. And you know, if we just project forward, the most critical conversations we're going to hear in the next 24 hours will be the first comments that either candidate makes in victory that may start a process of healing for the other side. It's going to be so close. We are such a divided electorate.
We do indeed. So one of the other major headlines of the hour, the stock market is in a state of disarray right now. What can you make of that?
Well, it was interesting when the FBI director Comey reversed his position and said essentially there wasn't a basis. The stock market rebounded and it shot up more than 300 points on Monday, and now that was on the expectation that the polls showing that Hillary Clinton would win were going to be accurate. Markets hate uncertainty. Now they're back in that uncertain territory and people don't know which way to go with their money. So we're just going to see a lot of chaos, at least for the next 24 or 48 hours. And maybe even beyond that as people adjust to whatever the outcome is.
So are the trends following that if Trump gets the presidency, the stock market will plummet, or is it just the uncertainty that's the reason the stock market is all in shambles right now?
I think right now people are reversing the momentum that they did on Monday. They're trying to undo that and go back to perhaps where they were, a safer position. But there will be a readjustment. Certainly, Donald Trump's attitude about engaging in trade deals, for instance, about redoing NAFTA, all those kinds of things, are going to send some shockwaves through the market. So we'll probably see that for a while. Markets tend to go through that, but once they find that there's some stability, they'll stabilize. But people ought to remember that Barack Obama will remain the president until the third week in January, so there is some time for some of this to work its way through. The fever will abate a little. So,
All right. Thank you so much, Dean Fiedler.
pleasure.
We'll be back to you later for more analysis.
when we know something.
All
Okay.
right.
All right, Caitlin.
Alicia, back to you.
But now over to our interview set where we have Caitlin Schiffer live with Dean Thomas Fiedler.
Thanks, Alicia. I'm joined once again by BU's Dean of the College of Communication, Tom Fiedler. Thanks for joining us once again.
It's all right. Don't want to leave yet.
It's a long night after
It
all.
is, yeah.
So what we're seeing with this race right now, it's very tight, and even though we can't take who the president is out of these results
Right.
so far, we can surmise that the country in general is divided. So how do we reconcile that in the future?
I think that's an excellent question. I was listening to earlier when Senator John McCain actually claimed victory in his re-election race in Arizona. And he seemed to go out of his way. In fact, his message to his supporters there was not rah, rah, aren't we great, we won. It was to praise his opponent and to talk about even the nobility of a challenge. And when there is defeat, that's part of it, but then you go forward. And he said he now saw as part of his responsibility representing the people that supported his opponent there. I thought that really set a standard for extraordinary grace in victory. And I think that, again, given what we're seeing, particularly in these battleground states, 1% and 2% difference, and as we know, a very hard-fought and angry campaign, I do think that having a victory, and even obviously how you accept defeat, be as gracious as that is going to be critically important in order for us to begin what will be a healing process, regardless of which side wins. I think there's got to be some outreach, or it's going to be, I think, a very bitter nation for a long time to come. Hope that doesn't happen.
And you mentioned how the presidential race, how people are going to accept those results. But how do you think that Trump and Clinton, depending on who wins, is going to reflect John McCain's response and graciously accept their win?
That's a really good question. I think if past is a guide to the future, in this case, that's an open question. Donald Trump, as we know, always talks about himself as a winner, and anybody who is not a winner, in his view, is a loser. And he has no respect whatsoever for losers. So it would be perhaps a character shift for him. I would hope that if he does win, that he finds that in him, or that advisors persuade him that that's necessary for him to go forward. Probably less of an issue. Hillary Clinton has tasted defeat before when she was a candidate, obviously, for the nomination in 2008. She knows what it means to be able to come back and so forth. So I would hope that that would happen. But it's so critically important. This has been a tough, nasty campaign. As we've heard in the exit polls, both candidates are relatively unpopular. So one way to, I think, begin to reverse that would be to show some grace in victory. We'll see.
We'll see. Well, thank you so much,
Sure.
Dean Fiedler, once again. Shannon and Alicia, back to you.
Now we're going to take things over to Caitlin Schiffer. She has an interview and analysis on tonight's election with John Carroll. Caitlin?
Thanks, Shannon. I'm joined now by BU Professor John Carroll. Thanks for joining us, Professor
Nice
Carroll.
to be back.
All right. So more numbers have come in since last we talked. What do these numbers mean?
These numbers mean that we're basically through the looking glass tonight. This is sort of bizarro world in a lot of ways. Let's just back up for a second and realize that Donald Trump is probably the only candidate Hillary Clinton could have beaten on the Republican side, and Hillary Clinton is about the only candidate Donald Trump could have beaten. So this is a race that was already entirely unusual. And now what you have is a situation where the unexpected happens. It defies the polls, it defies the pundits, it doesn't reflect what everyone thought was going to happen coming into tonight. It's still not over, but the interesting part is that Donald Trump has a much wider path to victory now than Hillary Clinton does. That's the opposite of how people were thinking about this race when we first came into the night.
Yeah, definitely. New York Times predicted that we would have a really short night, and that is exactly the opposite that we're seeing. So if Hillary Clinton has
That doesn't mean you should cancel your Times subscription, though. Stick with them.
got to support our friends at the Times.
Exactly.
So if Hillary Clinton has a smaller margin now, what's her path to victory? Is there a path to victory?
Her path to victory is pretty much through the Midwest at this point. If she can win Minnesota, she can win Michigan, then she has a chance of getting past Donald Trump. But I have to say, the Times, going back to the Times, they have a forecast page, and they're forecasting at this point a better than 95% chance that Donald Trump will win this race. But they're also forecasting, interestingly, and it doesn't look like it from the numbers right now, but they're forecasting that Hillary Clinton will win the popular vote. That's going to create a dynamic that's going to be really interesting if that's what happens. There's no guarantee it will, but that will be interesting, especially because in 2000, after the Bush-Gore rumpus happened, Hillary Clinton came out and called for the abolishing of the Electoral College. And so she may wind up tonight wishing that that had actually happened back in 2000, because if she wins the popular vote and Trump wins the electoral vote, there's going to be another uproar the way there was in 2000 in terms of how this system works and is this system fair or not.
So you anticipate that if this race continues to be too close to call, it will, the results will extend beyond tonight then?
It's possible. I mean, it's possible. We saw Andrea just talking about the possibility of a 269 to 269 tie in the Electoral College. That's going to extend it out for a while, because then it's got to go to the House of Representatives. Question is, will there be any challenges to the votes? Will there be somebody who comes in and says, I want to recount in this particular area? You know, in some cases, it's triggered by the closeness of the race. But in some cases, you can go in and you can buy a recount. And so Donald Trump may look and say, I'll spend some money here, and I'll buy a recount in these counties or in this state. So there could be real complications coming out of tonight. But you know, the way it looks now is there's a better chance of having a winner tonight than of having a tie tonight. So even though it's statistically possible, there's no sense that that is the likely outcome. That's a possible outcome. I think the more likely outcome is that there will be a winner.
All right, so finally, obviously we can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow exactly for sure right now. But what do you think the atmosphere is going to be like tomorrow for voters, for the campaigns, just in general?
First of all, I don't have a watch, but I think it is tomorrow, actually.
That's true.
But I think what's going to happen is this is going to be a real test of the democratic process in terms of a transition of power, but also a test in terms of the temperament of the two candidates. You know, is Hillary Clinton, if she loses, is she gracious in her loss? Is Donald Trump gracious in his victory, if that's the case? You know, can he be will he be a sore winner, or will he be a gracious winner? And that's going to say a lot for how things are going to go for the next couple of months as we transition into a new administration, one way or the other.
All right, well, thank you so much, Professor Carroll. We'll come back to you later tonight.
My
maybe
pleasure.
With a victory, who knows?
Who knows?
All right, back to you, Alicia and Channing.
Thanks, Andrea. And now we'll go over to Caitlin Schiffer, who's live in studio with some more analysis. What's happening right now with the election?
Thanks, Alicia. I'm joined once again by the Dean of the College of Communication, Tom Fiedler. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, sure. Good to be here still. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have seen huge upset, not anything anyone saw coming. So why are a lot of these states that we traditionally see as blue turning to red?
Well, I think what is really a surprise tonight, and I'm sure it's going to be one of those after-action studies that the Democrats go through, is there had been very high hopes that given the controversy surrounding Donald Trump regarding his attitude toward Hispanics, attitude toward women, the fact that Hillary Clinton would have been the first female president, all of these factors there led to the presumption that there would be a disproportionately high turnout in those particular groups. And as Zoe pointed out, among millennial voters this year, even though this is the first election in which every millennial was eligible to vote, born between 1980 and 1998, that the proportional turnout of millennial voters was lower for Hillary Clinton than it had been for Barack Obama. So I think that's an indication that the enthusiasm that Hillary Clinton had hoped to generate wasn't there. On the other side, the enthusiasm among Trump supporters was clearly there. I think we anticipated that it would be. People were angry, they were passionate about that. But all of the polls, all the predictions that we have seen for the weeks going into this, I think really missed this, and there's going to be a lot of that Monday morning quarterbacking in the next few days about just how those models were so badly misconstrued.
Definitely. So what can we credit this lack of showing for women and Hispanics, if you can even accredit it to anything right now?
Well, I would think the first thing that we have to look at was just, I'm sure that the incidences of the last couple of weeks, reopening that whole thing about Hillary Clinton's email server, that stopped whatever momentum that she had going in the 2 weeks before the election. And perhaps even when FBI Director Comey came out on Sunday and said things were back where they were, there wasn't enough time for that to really regain. So what stuck to Hillary Clinton all along was this sense that she's dishonest, she's corrupt, and of course that is the one-note attack that Donald Trump made on her the whole way. And I would imagine that we will find out that's the factor that really dampened enthusiasm for her ultimately, and kept this turnout below what they had hoped it would be.
Absolutely. Thank you so much once again, Dean Fiedler.
Well, it's not over yet, but
It's not over yet.
That's right. But this is like a football game where you're in that so-called red zone, where every inch you get gets harder and harder, and we're there to get to that 270.
Right there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Alicia and Channing, back to you guys.